Welcome to the May 11, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. We have 3 discussion items on our agenda today. These items are listed under new business, and we will hear full staff and applicant presentations. If any participants have issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. No one has signed up for public comment today. Moving on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is a list of requests that can be acted upon in one motion. There are 3 items on the consent agenda today. Staff has completed review and has delivered the items to the Planning Commission to be deferred to a future meeting. All of these items will return on a future agenda to be discussed fully. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. Commissioner Lampman?
Make a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Excellent. Do we have a second? Commissioner O'Haver?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Lampman has offered a motion and Commissioner O'Haver has seconded the motion. Because this is not a final vote, I will ask for a show of hands from all who support the motion. Those in support? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, there are 3 items today. These requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation. Item D.1 is case number Z6920. This is a request to rezone approximately a ½ acre of land located at 1302 Oberlin Road from residential 6 with neighborhood conservation overlay district to office mixed use 3 stories, urban limited conditional use. This is the first time we have heard and discussed this request. I would ask for a staff presentation from Sarah Ellis.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that brief summary. So, yep, this is a request to rezone just under a ½ acre from R6 with the NCOD to office residential mixed use, 3 with an urban limited frontage. And the Planning Commission deadline for action is June 21st, 2021. Okay, so the site is located at the corner of Oberlin Road and Annapolis. That's sort of that arc-shaped curve. And as you can see, there's a small variety of uses around there. So sort of to the immediate south, southeast of the site, there's some office uses, but then as you go a little bit further east, it's mostly low-density residential. To the south, that sort of Wade Oberlin section, there's a little bit more office, and then JC Park adjacent. And then if you go a little bit northwest, there's some medium-density residential. So generally a small mixture of uses around there. And here's just a zoomed in view of the site so you can see what you're looking at. But again, here's the site is backing out to low density residential, but then there's also a little bit of office surrounding it as well. And here's a couple of views of the site so you can see what you're looking at. So currently it has a structure on there. And sorry, there's a little bit of background noise. If someone could mute their mic, it keeps catching me. Thank you. Sorry, so number 1, you're looking into the site east on Oberlin Road, and there's currently an existing structure there. And number 2, you're looking into the site from that sort of arced street. That's Annapolis Drive, so on the side of it. Okay, so I did underline some proposed conditions, and I want to acknowledge this is the first time the commission is seeing this request, but it was on a consent agenda previously, and there had been modifications to the conditions since it was on the consent agenda. So I underlined the conditions that had changed since the first time the report was published. So just wanted to clarify that. So the proposed conditions limit the uses to only household living, limit the number of bedrooms in the units to no more than 3, prohibit vinyl and EIFS siding, limit the total number of residential units to no more than 13, and then there's a height limitation that would limit it to 28.7 feet and 2 stories within the way it's being defined in the wording is within the build to, and that's 20 feet since it's an urban limited frontage request. And I'll also note this is a summary. The full language of the conditions is provided in the backup, and it is much more detailed than what I've previewed here. And then the final one is the apartment building type shall mimic the appearance of the townhouse building type. And again, that's further elaborated in the conditions, but I summarized it just for the sake of fitting on this slide here. Okay, so here's a summary of the changes that are being requested. So essentially the density would increase the residential density would increase pretty substantially. It would go from a maximum of 2 units today to a maximum of 13, and then the setbacks would decrease pretty substantially, or apologies, not pretty substantially, the setbacks would decrease a bit. The request is consistent with the future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use. It's also consistent with, there are 2 urban form designations. So along Oberlin Road, it's a transit emphasis corridor. And then along Annapolis Drive, that's designated as a Main Street corridor. And the request with the urban limited frontage is consistent with both designations. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, again, with the future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use, and with those 2 urban form map designations. It's consistent with the following policies: compact development density transitions, as it would allow for a larger density of uses; housing variety, as it would expand the types of housing that could be on the site by expanding types of building types, apologies; zoning for housing and conservation of single family neighborhoods, as while the request is asking to increase the density, it does still permit single family housing on the site, as well as a larger variety of housing types; and then zoning for housing because it's increasing the density and types of housing that would be permitted on the site. Then the final ones, these are generally related to the frontage, so parking lot placement and encouraging pedestrian-oriented uses. Those conditions are both related to, or sorry, those policies are both consistent due to the urban limited frontage that is being requested. And then the frontage and design guidelines, similar, urban limited frontage is contributing to those. And single family lots on major streets, this is one of those policies that sort of tugs at both sides, that it would be allowing for a denser variety of uses that would be on the single family lot that's currently on Oberlin Road, which is a major street. Inconsistent policies, conserving, enhancing, and revitalizing neighborhoods, and infill compatibility. It's inconsistent with these, as it would allow a property that would be a larger bulk and sort of size than the existing properties in the area. So it would change the character of what is there currently. There's one outstanding issue, and I will note it's a very minor one. There's just some slight technical corrections that need to be made to the conditions. And I noted this in the board docs piece as well, that the agenda was published prior to staff's complete review of the conditions. The applicant submitted everything at the time that they were instructed to, and the conditions need some very minor corrections that would not have any implication on policy. It's simply clarifying some language to make sure that your understanding is the same understanding that development services will have down the road should they be reviewing a site plan. So just a couple minor clarifications needed. And again, the deadline for action is June 21st, 2021, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Next, we have Michael Birch here on behalf of the applicant. The applicant and all those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Planning Commission. This is Worth Mills from Longleaf Law Partners. On behalf of the applicant, Johnny Chappell, I'm also joined by Jason Meadows of Wake Land Design. And as Sarah mentioned, this is the first opportunity for Planning Commission to hear this rezoning case C6920. And as Sarah mentioned, she did a great job in her presentation in laying out the existing conditions and the policies. This is a property of approximately 0.5 acres located in the northeast quadrant of the Oberlin Road, Annapolis Drive intersection, currently zoned R10 with that Oberlin Village NCOD. The future land use map guidance and the urban form map guidance both call for a higher intensity development than the current R10 zoning. And while we recognize that, we have also had multiple discussions with our neighbors, specifically those living on on Great Oaks Drive to the north and with the Hillsborough Wade CAC members. And these conditions at the bottom of the screen here, those are, summaries, and I've got the precise language later on in the presentation, but these are the result of those discussions. From what we have gathered from our immediate neighbors to the north on Great Oaks Drive, it seems like we have reached an agreement, and we're on a mutual understanding, which was why we deferred the case on that April 27th meeting. If you go to the next slide, please. So again, here we see the site and its orientation to Oberlin Road and Annapolis Drive. The topography of the site is sloping away from Oberlin Drive as you go further east into the site. You see the Great Oaks Drive single-family homes to our north. We have the Care First Animal Hospital, the financial planning, the various office services along Annapolis Drive. So there is an existing office component and character within that portion of the kind of Wade Oberlin interchange. And then we've got the Chester Place townhomes across Oberlin Village, or across Oberlin Road, excuse me. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the current zoning and the orientation of the Oberlin Village in COD. Next slide. I will note that we are the only property within the Oberlin Village in COD that does have a mixed-use future land use map designation. And so what we have tried to do with our conditions is to mirror that height limitation along Oberlin Road where practical. So you will get the sense of character and the sense of the Oberlin Village community as you drive down Oberlin Road, while also promoting kind of the best and the highest residential uses for this site, serving as a appropriate land use transition from the office uses across Annapolis Drive towards the moderate and low density residential to our west and to our north. Next slide, please. The urban format has also guided our rezoning by including the urban limited frontage. Oberlin Road, as Sarah mentioned, is a transit emphasis corridor. Annapolis Drive designated as a main street. Annapolis Drive calls for the urban type of frontage, and when you have a conflict between the different guidances between transit emphasis corridors and the main street designation, the comprehensive plan recommends the more urban frontage designation. And what that will do is it will pull the buildings closer to Oberlin Road and closer to Annapolis Drive, which will create a more natural buffer just from the orientation of the proposed townhomes for those neighbors to the north on Great Oaks Drive. Next slide, please. And this last slide here shows our conditions as they are drafted in the rezoning application. So we're limiting household living uses, which are primarily single unit, 2-unit, and multi-unit living in the OX district. So there won't be any non-residential component here, which was a key point that the neighbors made to us throughout our discussions. We're limiting the number of bedrooms per unit to no more than 3 to try to, make sure that to show our intent that, this isn't going to be some type of student housing development, which was another item that we heard from our neighbors. We have prohibited the vinyl and synthetic stucco as building siding materials. We want to create a quality product that blends with the existing development adjacent to us. We've limited the number of dwelling units to 13. And then number 5, that is the height condition for those buildings within the Oberlin Road build-to range. So we anticipate having a number of townhomes that would front Oberlin Road, with the remainder fronting Annapolis Drive. And for those on Oberlin, we want to preserve that height character of 2 stories and 28.7 feet, which is consistent with the Oberlin Village and COD. And then lastly, we're prohibiting stacked units, meaning that dwelling units can't be separated by a horizontal party wall. The The development may have to be condo just based on some of the practicalities of the site, but we wanted to make sure that this has a townhouse character to it, even though it could be considered a condo. That's all that we have today. I would like to just reiterate that this rezoning case is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall and a majority of the applicable policies. It's consistent with the urban form map, the future land use map, and the conditions that we've presented today have come through those discussions that we've continued to have with neighbors, specifically those on Great Oaks Drive. I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Next, I would like to hear from those opposed to this request. All the persons signed up to speak in opposition will have a total of 10 minutes for comment. Each speaker should be mindful of the running timer. Can we have the moderator set the timer for 10 minutes and call the first speaker, please?
All right, our first speaker is Charles Bell.
Yes, you can hear me okay?
Yes, sir, we can.
Great, thank you. Thanks for allowing me to speak. First off, I'd like to thank Johnny Chapel for making an effort to hear our neighborhood's concerns. I understand he made some restrictive conditions for the rezoning request, and we certainly appreciate his efforts. Our concerns have been reasonable, and we still have a few. We're a quiet, single-family neighborhood. The property in question is next door to our neighborhood. It's directly behind my adjacent neighbor's property, very close to mine. From what I understand, this request will remove the Oberlin Village Overlay District on this property that our neighborhood still falls under. This restriction was self-imposed by our neighborhood to reduce density and to provide some development consistency. The height limit is 28.7 feet, and the developer is requesting removal of this overlay, which will increase the height to a maximum of 50 feet. And I recognize the developer's request to reduce height and increase setbacks from Oberlin. Our concern really is around the setback on the side and rear of the property. That's adjacent to our properties. And from what I understand, the developer could take an average setback of the property, and that would mean the possibility of a higher than 50-foot max in some areas. My property is 25 feet lower than the property, so this height could possibly be 75 to 100 feet higher than my property. We'd like to see a more definitive wider setback than the 10-foot setback on the side and rear that would be allowed under this rezoning. There are several properties developed like this that have rooftop access. Our neighborhood would be very concerned if this development had many residents having access to the roof 50 to 100 feet above our neighborhood. Our neighborhood, would like to see a condition that doesn't allow rooftop access. Our neighborhood realizes that renderings are not required in this process, but, obviously not knowing what the developer's planning to build next to our neighborhood worries us, and so we've asked for more specific details on developers' plans. We really haven't gotten any at this point. We appreciate the developer's willingness to listen to our concerns and has put in some restrictions as a result of some of those concerns. Again, these concerns are reasonable. Any neighborhood would obviously be very worried about these. We would ask that the commission defer this vote so that the developer can properly address our concerns. Thank you for your consideration and time. That's it.
The next speaker is John Nash.
Hey, good morning. I'd like to start by just saying thanks to the Planning Commission and hosting us and all the contributions that you provide to the city. And thank you also to Johnny for being on this call, as well as Longleaf Law, and for your initial steps in recognizing that this is a residential community and that, low density residential product is the only real fit for your property. That being said, and as Charles has mentioned already, there are still some very typical yet very reasonable concerns that we feel haven't been addressed that really need some clarification and some further discussion. To start, the proper natural buffers as well as those vertical setbacks. The neighboring properties are restricted with a 50-foot vertical easement. And when I say neighboring properties, I'm referring to the two commercial buildings along Annapolis on our residential side. Obviously, since this is more of a residential approach now, those vertical buffers need to be defined, and whether they are 30 feet, 40 feet, I think we need to discuss that, given that our properties back up immediately to this piece. My property is one of those 1809 Great Oaks that does share a lot line with Johnny's piece. In fact, my patio, I measured this morning, is 24 inches from Johnny's lot line. The way these vertical setbacks and buffers are written in now, I guess, within 5 to 10 feet of our patio and less than 20 feet from our home, there could be a 3-story building looking into our home. And I think I'm not the only one here, but I think that significantly prohibits our privacy as well as our peaceful enjoyment of our home. All of our homes that back up to this piece, what we're looking at is the potential of a 50-plus foot property. Every home in Great Oaks Drive is restricted with the overlay district, and we think that there ought to be a better solution to this property rather than completely disregarding it. I looked to a couple examples in town, and one that I believe Johnny is helping with the brokerage on, the Clark Townhomes just down the street. Those are technically a 3-story building, but the first story is below grade. It has living space, it has a garage, and yet it only is a 2-story building from grade. I think that's a great example and something that should be considered. Height concerns and the disregard of this Oberlin overlay is another one of those big concerns that our neighborhood certainly has. Exactly how high is this structure going to be? We talked about the average grade of Johnny's lot. Johnny's lot does sit higher than all the homes on Great Oaks Drive. So it's feasible to think that, 40, 50 feet up is going to be significantly higher than any of our homes, and they'll be able to look into our bedrooms, our kitchens, our living rooms. That's a major concern that every house on Great Oaks Drive has. If our neighborhood is restricted by this overlay district, I don't quite understand why there aren't more restrictions on this property, or why it would not be restricted as well. Even the 2 commercial buildings next door are restricted. Those 2 buildings on our side of Annapolis are not higher than 2 stories. Renderings, as Charles has discussed, we've been discussing this project for almost 7 months now. The developer reached out in November, and we've yet to see any sort of renderings or any sort of understandings as to the footprint of his project. Are we talking 1 building? Are we talking 2 buildings? I think it's time, and I think it's appropriate for us to at least get an idea as to where this building or buildings will sit on this less than half-acre lot. Ingress and egress, how's that going to work? There's still no understanding there. That's a safety concern on my end. We're adding a potential of 13 units. That's a potential of 50 plus people that are trying to turn onto a 6-lane Oberlin road. 6 lanes is difficult as is. If we're adding that many folks to our neighborhood, I question how feasible that really is. I think renderings are going to lead to a lot of answers if we can just kind of move forward with that. And because we have these very typical and very reasonable concerns, I also think it is reasonable to defer a vote on this case until the applicant can further clarify his intentions there. Certainly do applaud Johnny for adding the townhome condition that he committed to.
Mr. Nash, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to remind you we have other speakers and you've used a fair amount of the 10 minutes.
I understand. I'll tie it up here. I just wanted to thank the developer for taking this initial step. I think it's an important one, and we look forward to finding happy medium down the road. Thank you.
All right, next we have Cam Randolph.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay. My name is Kim Randolph, and on behalf of my mother, Beverly Shavlick, and my boss, Paul Reynolds, where I'm at work right now on 1301 Annapolis Drive, beside Dr. Joe Gordon's 4-story veterinary office. I am I have written, so excuse me from reading, but that's just easier since I am at work. John Nash and Charles Nash failed to say that we don't live on Great Oaks. We call it Great Folks. So as the woman, I had to get that out. We want to thank the Planning Commission for your time and contributions to the community and city, but we would like to commend Johnny for hearing our concerns and recognizing that it is a residential neighborhood and is fit only for low density residential product such as townhomes. With that said, there are a couple of reasonable concerns and I would like to address to make sure adequate transitions and buffers to our neighborhood are put in place. It is imperative to have proper setbacks for the building to ensure we have privacy and peaceful enjoyment. We would like to ask for a 30-foot, no vertical building buffer between the townhouse and the neighboring Great Oaks property line. That 30-foot buffer would include the required buffer for the developer chooses. We would be fine with parking or a road in addition to the required setback to meet the 30 feet. You initially submitted conditions holding you to a 2-story, maximum 50-foot step back from Oberlin Road. In the most recent submission, you have made a negative change to 20 feet. The applicant expressed that they were inserting the 50-foot step back to preserve the integrity of the Oberlin overlay district, which we all have had to abide by. We ask that the 50-foot step back of 2 stories be from the Great Oaks neighboring property lines, not from Oberlin Road. Our goal is to prevent a massive structure from being built right on top of our homes. Are these
Ms. Randolph, I apologize.
Yeah.
The time has run out. Without opposition, I'd like to allow you to at least complete your thoughts. And if we have another speaker, to give that speaker an additional minute.
All right, I'll do that. So generally, we just commend the developer for adding the townhouse only condition, but we ask him to revisit the buffer setbacks and privacy concerns that have been brought forth today. We look forward to him making revisions and we would like to have this deferred. Thank you for your time.
All right, the final speaker is Marshall Colbert.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Thank you for the extra time. I would just quickly like to thank the commission for your time. And Johnny, thanks for listening to us. And I would just really like to echo everything that our neighbors are saying and agree with everything that the points we're trying to make. But simply to say that we do think that we ought to preserve the integrity of the Oberlin Overlay District, which we all have to abide by. And I would like to ask the Planning Commission, again, to defer the vote on this case to allow the applicant a chance to make some additional changes to some of the concerns we've addressed. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Ray, I believe that is the last speaker. Is that correct?
Yes, that's all we have.
Thank you. I'd now like to allow for questions and comments from the commissioners. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If so, please be recognized to speak. Commissioner Mann?
I had a quick point of clarification. Mr. Mills's presentation stated that the current zoning was R10 with the overlay district, but staff's presentation and all of the background information that we have states that it's R6. So I just wanted to clarify, was it R6 or R10 that we're looking at rezone?
It is R6. That's my apologies. I misrepresented that on accident, but it is R6.
Thank you for the clarification.
Are there any additional questions? Commissioner Miller?
Could staff or the applicant explain why this is an OX rezoning case that's conditioned down to residential? I believe it has to do with frontage, but I want to make sure I understand the full scope of that instead of just making it a residential mixed use. Or
Commissioner Miller, this is Worth Mills. Our previous proposals and iterations of the rezoning included the possibility of office use. And from that, from the time that we filed it, it has been designated or proposed as office mixed use. With the household living condition, there really isn't a difference, practically speaking, between the RX and the OX designation here. The standards for either an apartment or a townhome are the same in that sense.
And just to clarify, at this stage in the case, if the applicant wanted to change the base district while it's still under review for planning commission, they could. Functionally, I don't think it makes any difference to the potential development outcome here. It just, the map will look different if it's RX versus OX.
Do we have any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner McIntosh?
Thank you, Chair Fox. So I just have one comment. This is kind of zooming out to the big picture of development in Raleigh. At our last meeting, we had 3 rezoning cases for affordable housing that were all located in East Raleigh. And per the comprehensive plan map H2, this site in West Raleigh is within an affordable housing opportunity area, but no subsidized housing is being offered. And I just wanted to note that.
Thank you for your comment. Question to the applicant. Can you clarify for me what the side and rear setbacks are? What we're considering side and rear for this particular parcel?
Yeah, so for the property boundaries to the single family homes on Great Oaks Drive, we would be subject to Zone A protective yard of the neighborhood transition zones. Typically that Zone A is either 10 feet or 20 feet. Both of those versions of the Zone A protective yard include either a wall or a fence at least 6.5 feet in height, with planning schedules for each. I can list those out for you if you'd like, but the north property line would be subject to those neighborhood transition requirements of Zone A.
Thank you. One other question while I have you on the line. Can you provide a little bit more clarification about the zoning condition that's prohibiting vertical separation of the units? My assumption is that they would look functionally like townhomes, regardless of the construction type. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's with the possibility of these being condo units, but at the same time, I'm wanting to create a townhome character and a townhome look within the site. And so that stacked unit prohibition, meaning we can't separate dwelling units with a horizontal party wall, just furthers that intent.
So quick question to Mr. Bowers, just putting you on the spot. With 13 unit development with a townhome character and look along a transit emphasis corridor, is that sort of meeting the definition of what the city is calling missing middle housing?
Yeah, I would think so. I think the density functional density here at 13 acres on about a half acre, 13 units on about a half acre of property obviously works out to a little bit north of 26 units per acre. I think that's on the high side of what would be permitted. Well, it's higher than what would be permitted in a residential zone under TC 520, which is the text change committee is taking up this afternoon. But this is obviously a lot that is located right at the exit ramp for Wade Avenue on Oberlin Road. So it's a little bit different than a lot that might be in the interior of the neighborhood. But it certainly falls, missing middle kind of generally falls between the low density detached dwellings and the very intense mid-rise apartment. For reference points, most of the mid-rise apartments that are like in the 5-story range you've seen rise around the Cameron Village downtown and Hillsborough Street area have been in the 80 to 90 units per acre density range. So this is about less than a third of that. So I would say that we have not defined missing middle specifically in the comp plan, but as the term is generally understood in planning parlance, I would think that this type of product would sort of fall into there because it's occurring on a relatively modestly sized infill lot at a density lower than a large apartment block building would have.
Thank you, sir. Are there any additional questions or comments? Commissioner O'Haver?
Thanks, Chair Fox, and thank you for clarifying the side yard setbacks or the requirements because they're equal or greater to what the existing zoning requires. One more clarification, I heard the neighbors mention a 50-foot height of the building, but I'm expressly reading in the condition, and I just want to clarify that the building height is limited to 28.7 feet and 2 stories. Can staff confirm that?
I'd be happy to clarify that. So the condition is only limiting the height within the build to. So that would be within the 0 to 20 feet build to of the urban limited frontage. So the height could in fact be up to 3 stories outside of that build to. So further south on the lot, if you will, outside of the 20 feet.
Great, thank you for that.
Commissioner Rains, I believe I saw your hand.
Thanks, Chair Fox. Just a clarification from staff. So there's a transitional yard from the building to the northern property line of at least 10 feet using the transition model A. And then if I heard correctly from a neighbor, they said that their patio to their property line, or their fence, I guess, was 2 feet or around there. So technically, just to clarify, there could be potentially a building line 12 feet from the neighbor's northern patio. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, if they were able to place their building at that minimum setback of 10 feet, and if in fact the patio is 2 feet off of the dividing property line, then that would be 12.
I believe I saw Commissioner Lampman's hand as well.
I just have, I have two, and thank you. I have two just administrative type questions. One is a clarification on height. So I understand that the roof will be a roof deck. So the height limitation, is that to the cutoff of the building roof, or does that include like other structures to, I don't know, like kind of glass walls or something to help folks kind of stay on the roof? I just don't know what that height, like pergolas or anything like that, does that contribute to height?
Seeing no one jump in, I'll give a general answer and then maybe follow up a little more specifically, because you've entered an area that is somewhat gray. There is in the way height is measured, there are limitations for parapet walls, but generally you're measuring to the top of the roof of the structure for height. So if you simply finish the roof such a way that there's like a patio area and you could stand on it, we wouldn't consider that an increase in height. If you build a wall that goes up around that, then that would be a parapet wall, and there would be a limitation, I believe, on that. And then if you put an additional structure on top of there that had its own roof, we'd have to look at it in the context of what the nature of that structure was. But potentially that could add to the building height if it was a permanent structure on top of the building that had a roof. It would be like an addition on the top of the roof.
Thank you. The other administrative
That's the top of my
question I
head.
have
That's an
is,
off the top of my head answer to that question. If this is deferred, I think we'd have more time to delve into the nuances of that and come with a more definitive answer, or the applicant might want to clarify in their conditions.
Thank you. The only other question was more administrative. On the board docs, the PowerPoint presentation seems to be the old presentation, so I just didn't know if that was going to be updated. I know that the written format, the plan was updated, but didn't know if the PowerPoint would be. Thanks.
Thank you. Quick question to the applicant. Have you considered additional buffering and or language related to the height on the northern edge of the parcel?
Chair Fox, this is Worth Mills. Our primary focus with our neighbors was on the townhouse versus non-residential discussion. That was the key points that we had consistently heard from neighbors about, what was most important to them was that there would be no non-residential uses on this site. And since we had, drafted additional language that, the stacked units would be prohibited, the unit count would be reduced to 13. We had not heard any negative comments from the neighbors after sending those over. So this is kind of the first time that we had heard any of these comments from the neighbors as far as, the buffering standards. It was primarily focused around non-residential versus residential development. And I think that we've made a lot of concessions throughout this process to get to this point, but not something that we have looked at. And I believe that we would want to rely on the UDO code requirements at this time.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, Commissioner Miller?
I just wanted to clarify, I know there needs to be one technical correction. Is that something, and they mentioned this, is that something with any additional changes that we need to hold for?
I believe a technical revision can be made as part of the motion.
Okay.
That's correct. And I would like to clarify the height question, having now reviewed the section on height encroachments that's in the UDO, that up to 12 feet, a parapet wall or a patio or shade structure or unenclosed deck can encroach into that height.
Commissioner Fox, if I may, I'd just like to make a clarification in response to Commissioner Lampman's question about the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint that was provided in board docs had the conditions that were submitted at the time of the agenda publication. I made a note in board docs stating that there may be some updates to the staff presentation at the time of the meeting. It's simply an issue of timing.
Thank you, Sarah. Commissioner Lampman?
And just to be clear on the height, when you say it encroaches in the height restriction, does that mean that the height, including any structure on the roof, is within the 28 feet? Okay, thanks.
And Commissioner Lampman, this is Worth. I know that there have been talk of rooftop access. I don't think that we, that's not something that we have proposed as a concept. I'm not saying one way or the other, but we just haven't committed. That's certainly not like a hard set vision that Johnny has for the property, just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any additional follow-up questions for the applicant or staff? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Miller?
I'd like to make a motion to approve case Z6920 as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, in particular policies LU 1.2, the future land use map, LU 5.4, density transitions, LU 8.1 for housing variety, and LU 7.3, single family lots on major streets. And include that this recommendation for approval will include the technical revision set forth in the report.
Thank you, ma'am. And Commissioner O'Haver?
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Miller and a second by Commissioner O'Haver. Is there any further discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of the votes, at the conclusion of which I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Rain?
Aye.
Vice Chair Winters?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.2, that's case number Z1021. This is a request to rezone approximately 7 acres of land on Creedmoor Road, south of Sherborne Place, from residential 4 to residential mixed use 7 stories parking limited conditional use. The applicant has offered conditions that limit uses, building height, number of dwelling units, increases setbacks, buffering, and reduces building height at the northern property line, and offered additional traffic study at the site plan stage. I would like to ask for a staff presentation from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. As was mentioned, Z1021, it's a request to rezone all over 6.5 acres along Creedmoor Road from R4 to RX7PLCU. Next slide. So the site is 6 parcels located in a predominantly residentially zoned area. There is a RX district across Creedmoor Road to the west, and some additional mixed-use districts farther north along Creedmoor Road. So this is an aerial view of the context. So this is north of Crabtree Valley Mall, a mix of low and moderate density residential located to the east and west and just south of the site. And then further north, there is some commercial use near the intersection with West Millbrook Road. Here's a close-up. As you can see, the site is mostly forested. There are 3 detached houses located on the site, and then detached housing to the north and east. Farther south, there's some apartment uses, and then to the west, townhome development and senior living. So here's some views of the site. The site does only have frontage on Creedmoor Road. It gets fairly close to Sherborne Road, but the only frontage actual access is from Creedmoor Road. So there are 8 proposed conditions. The first prohibits some uses that are normally permitted in RX. Second limits the building height to 6 stories. And the third limits total number of residential units to 325. And then conditions 4 through 7 all pertain to the shared property line with the detached houses to the north and east of the site. So there's one condition that requires a 60-foot setback of any building. Condition 5 specifies that any building that's located within 75 feet of that area be no more than 3 stories and 50 feet. And then There is an option in the UDO for a neighborhood transition yard landscaped area that does not require either a fence or a wall. And condition 6 specifies that if that option is chosen, they will also include a 6.5-foot fence. And then condition 7 adds additional evergreen plantings to the landscaped area in addition to the UDO required plantings. And then finally, the last condition would require a traffic impact analysis to be conducted at the first site plan submittal and require that to include a signal warrant study for the Sherborne and Creedmoor intersection. The UDO may require this at site plan stage anyway, but this condition does make that a certainty. So existing versus proposed zoning, the request would change the zoning from a residential district to a mixed-use district. This removes on the site. The condition does cap the number of dwelling units at 325. And then RX districts do allow a small amount of commercial uses like office and retail. However, these are only permitted at the corner of 2 public streets, which I'll note this site currently is not located there. So without that, no non-residential uses are permitted. The site is designated as office and residential mixed use on the future land use map. The requested RX district aligns with that designation. Although I will note that the request, for which is a 7-story district conditioned to 6 stories, is a little taller than the comprehensive plan recommends in this context. Adjacent to low density residential would recommend only 4 stories. The conditions do include some buffering of that, limiting the height near there. But the comprehensive plan would recommend that be include a 150-foot area. Next slide. And there's no urban form guidance for this site. Overall, the request is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan, including future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use. And there are a handful of policies that the request is consistent with. These include policies on compact development, offering additional buffering to neighboring properties, transitioning away from single-family lots located on major streets, allowing only ancillary retail in office and residential mixed-use areas, and zoning to allow additional housing. There are also a few policies that the request is inconsistent with. So aside from rezoning away from a residential district, the request would also permit a building of a height and a massing that is different from the surrounding context, and for that reason is inconsistent with policies around reinforcing the urban pattern and infill compatibility. I believe that's the end of the staff presentation. Your deadline for action is July 12th, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Recco. Now I'd like to hear from Collier Marsh representing the applicant. The applicant and all of those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Ms. Chair and members of the commission. I am Collier Marsh with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh on behalf of the applicant. Hannah did a great job summarizing this request, so I'll highlight a few additional key points, and then we have our engineers and representatives from the applicant on the line as well to answer any questions. Next slide, please. So this slide shows our site and the surrounding area. We're about 6.7 acres, 5 total parcels with the different street addresses listed there at the top of the slide. All of the frontage, as Hannah mentioned, is on Creedmoor Road. Although we're just south of the intersection of Creedmoor Road and Sherborne Place, we don't actually have frontage on Sherborne Place. The site's surrounded by a mixture of uses. There's multifamily uses to the south, assisted living to the west, townhomes to the southwest, and then single family homes to the north and to the east. Now, if you move a little further north of the site, there's a greater mixture of uses, including more dense commercial and office uses. And then heading south, you only go a short distance before you hit the intersection of Creedmoor Road and Glenwood Avenue, which, as we all know, has a much higher mixture of uses and higher density uses in that area. Next slide, please. So the staff report and Hannah's presentation highlighted the consistency of our request with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use. What the comprehensive plan says on this future land use map designation is that it's primarily for frontage along major roads. Here, Creedmoor Road scheduled to become a 6-lane divided, so certainly a major road where low density residential uses are just no longer appropriate. And the RX category is one of the appropriate categories for this designation. What the comprehensive plan also says for this designation is that heights above 4 stories are appropriate for locations along major corridors where adjacent uses would not be adversely impacted. So what we've tried to do here is put together a proposal that's fully consistent with this future land use map designation and that achieves the desired transition between Creedmoor Road and those lower density residential uses to the east. The request is also consistent with numerous policies outlined in staff's presentation and report. And I've put those on the slide here as Hannah just went through those, but some of the notable ones are compact development and the buffering requirements to provide those appropriate transitions that are called for in the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So our proposal is for an RX7 PLCU designation, and we have 8 total conditions that are summarized on this slide. And most of these conditions were what we proposed from the beginning. We came out strong knowing that what you needed to do here was provide appropriate transitions to those residential properties. Those have been tweaked to some degree in response to comments and feedback. And then the most recent addition is the 8th condition that commits to a TIA and a signal warrant analysis. But just going through each of the actual proposed conditions, the first one is a common prohibition of the less desirable uses, things like fraternities and sororities that certainly aren't appropriate for this location. We have a maximum 6-story building height, which I'll provide a little more detail in a slide in a moment, a maximum of 325 residential units. Conditions 4 through 7 all add to those buffers and protective yards between our site and single family residential development. I've got a slide on that in a moment to provide a lot more detail. And we'll talk about the final condition on the traffic impact analysis in a moment as well. Next slide, please. So this slide provides the detail on our proposed buffer for conditions, which we believe are key elements to the rezoning because they provide that transition that's called for in the comprehensive plan. We're cognizant of the need to locate our project as close to Creedmoor Road as possible and then appropriately transition to these neighboring properties. So the 4 buffer conditions that we've proposed are summarized on the left-hand side of this slide and then depicted on the right-hand side. The first condition prohibits buildings of any type within 60 feet of these adjacent residential properties. That condition and that 60-foot no build zone is shown in pink in the image on the right. The second condition makes the maximum building height 3 stories within 75 feet of those adjacent residential properties. And this 75-foot zone is shown in yellow on the slide to the right. Third, there must be a minimum 6.5-foot fence along the property line with these adjacent residential properties. And as Hannah mentioned, this is a bit of a gap filler in the code. So the transitional protective yards have a number of options that you can choose. And depending on which ones you choose, a fence may or may not be required. And so what we've done here is we've ensured that no matter which protective yard is provided, that it will include a minimum 6.5-foot fence. The final buffer condition that we've added is to commit to extra plantings within those transitional protective yards. So the UDO will require some level of planting and screening within the protective yard. And so what we've done here is we've said that in addition to the required plantings, we are going to put an additional 8 evergreen trees per 100 feet within that protective yard. Again, the idea is to provide more effective screening between our use and the adjacent residential properties. Next slide, please. So As I mentioned a moment ago, although this rezoning seeks a 7-story designation, we've included a condition that limits the maximum overall height to 6 stories. And as I'm sure the Planning Commission has seen many times, this is what you have to do if you're between 5 and 7. So the code jumps from 5 to 7, and then we choose 7, condition down to 6. But this slide shows exactly why we're seeking that 6-story height designation. As you see on the image to the right, the site has a lot of slope, and that slope is moving in a number of different directions. And there's essentially a bowl towards the rear of the site. In total, the overall elevation change is 70 feet across the site, but from the highest point to the lowest point. So if you were to try and build a building with uniform stories and uniform height, the only way to accomplish that would be some sort of massive retaining wall, which we don't think is appropriate here and not what we want to do. And I don't think that our neighbors would like that either. So what we're proposing is a building that follows the contour of the site and steps down with the slope. So the building, what we envision would be something closer to a 5-6 split, but it would be 5 stories at the higher elevations, and then the 6th story would actually step down as you go down in elevation, almost like a basement or a walkout level at those lower points. One of the things that I think's worth noting with the slope is, as you can see, if you move from west to east or left to right on the slide, the slope goes down moving east, but then it actually goes back up again as you continue east to those neighboring residential properties. And so we believe and we expect that a lot of the building height will actually sit below those neighboring properties. And so our neighbors wouldn't experience the full height that's proposed with this development. Next slide, please. So our last condition commits to performing a traffic impact analysis and a signal warrant analysis at the site plan stage. Traffic on Creedmoor Road was the main issue that came up throughout this rezoning process. We heard from neighbors at many different locations in the area, the townhomes to the southwest, the senior living community directly to the west, as well as folks in the single family neighborhood to the north and to the east, about just existing difficulty on Creedmoor Road and concerns about what would happen with another development. And we spoke with a number of different neighbors directly on this, including HOA presidents and individual residents. And what we learned through that process is that our interests were really aligned with the neighbors, that the same issues that we heard about are going to be issues that our residents faced. And so we wanted to explore some sort of solution to those problems. Now, the tricky part is that a traffic impact analysis was not required at the rezoning stage. And we had been telling the neighbors, well, we would expect to do one at the site plan stage, but we put our money where our mouth is and committed to performing that traffic impact analysis to ensure that we're going to study and find an effective solution. Now, within that commitment and that condition, it specifically commits to performing a signal warrant analysis at the intersection of Creedmoor Road and Sherborne Place, shown with the yellow star on the left-hand side of this slide. That's where the neighbors directly adjacent to our property access the site, also where the senior living community to the west accesses the site in an area of particular concern that we want to study. Another option that we want to explore that we think might be the most viable solution, marked with red, with the red star on the left-hand side and then depicted on the right-hand side of this slide, is providing U-turn lanes at that location. Neighbors in the area already rely on U-turns to access their sites, or their homes, depending on where they're coming from. But they often have to travel long distances or have conflicting locations. So we look at this location as an opportunity to have a more convenient location with less opportunity for conflict. I hear the beeping. So to wrap up, our request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. We've endeavored to show our commitment to be good neighbors through our zoning conditions, and we respectfully request your recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. I'd now like to hear from those opposed to this request. All the persons signed up to speak in opposition have a total of 10 minutes for comment. Ray, can you please call the first speaker?
Opposed, I just have Doyle Parrish.
Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning, Chairperson Fox and Vice Chair Winters and Commission members. I appreciate this time, and I speak on my behalf as well as many of my neighbors. I live at 2609 Kingsley Drive, which is in the neighborhood, not directly adjacent to this, but one lot away from the perimeter of this property. I've lived there since 1985, which is 36 years, and as fate would have it, I am one of the newest members of the neighborhood. Most of my neighbors have been there longer than I have. In that regard, we have a lot of older neighbors that have not really had a chance to fully participate in this process. They're not familiar with Zoom calling or Zoom meetings. We have had 2 neighborhood meetings. One neighborhood meeting was just prior to Christmas. I think it was the 17th, and the other one was just a couple of weeks ago. So therein lies part of my request for delaying this decision today for this approval. We have a neighborhood that consists of lots ranging from 1 acre to 3 acres. We live under covenants in that neighborhood that will not allow future infill of those lots. We have very serious concerns about the density that's being proposed at this site. Our understanding on the land use plan prior to this proposal was that this would be a office and residential mixed use, which would limit the height and also the density of this lot. So this was a little bit of a surprise that this proposal came in seeking 325 units and 520 parking spaces on what we consider to be a minimum of 6.69 acres, particularly given the topography of the site and the ingress and egress problems that exist. So we were surprised by that, and therefore are going to argue the point that the high density that's being sought is not appropriate. There is no transition zone between this site and our site, other than what the applicant is saying is minimally required by the code. The site does, in fact, slope from Creedmoor Road to Conover Court, which is the closest street to the site to the east, by a total of almost 40 feet. I think it's 38 feet by map. The buildings that are proposed would and could be more than 60 feet in height. While the applicant is saying the buildings will be stepped in nature, that is true and would have to be the most profitable way to grade the site. The entire site is going to have to be denuded, and all the greenery that is there now will have to be stripped so that the site can be used for the density that they're calling for. So therefore, we're going to have residents that are going to be, in some cases, 50, in some cases maybe more feet beneath the height of the building that's being proposed. We don't believe that as the plan calls for, that this is necessary to have this type of density in this area. We have reviewed and looked at the other developments in the Crabtree Market and Crabtree area. I was unable to find one that exceeded 5 stories. This one is going to be 6 stories, and we just don't think that is a necessary use for this particular property. Not to mention the adverse effect that it's going to have on traffic in our area. To traverse to Crabtree or to the Glenwood Avenue intersections, now you have 2 routes. You can go either by U-turn back down Creedmoor Road, or you can cut through our neighborhood on Sherborne to Kingsley to Town and Country to Lead Mine. And as the city knows, and as we've experienced over time, quite a bit of increase in traffic flowing in that direction, and we believe this would just add an intolerable amount of traffic through our neighborhood, taking the most convenient and progressive route to Glenwood. I have taken the liberty and appreciate the ability to send my comments to the commission directly, and also to Hannah. We are, as a neighborhood, would like to have more time to respond to the proposed development, We would like to have more information about the proposed development. We have not seen any cut or sections or what the buildings or the parking will look like on this site. And so we think that that would be a proper and right thing for us to look at, as well as we think it would be the right and proper thing for the commission to look at. So, and also by request of many of my neighbors, they have asked that this be put off so that they would have a chance to participate directly in this conversation. Their most preferred way of communicating is not by WebEx or by Zoom, but would have a in-person meeting. I believe that if we can get to the July meeting, that we would be able to have an in-person meeting. And I know that my neighbors would very much like to participate in that. So thank you again for hearing me this morning. We appreciate your consideration. We would ask that this request by the developer be postponed and put off until we get more information. That would be both good for the neighborhood and also, I think, proper for the commission. Thank you again, Chairperson Fox and Vice Chair Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Ray, do we have any additional speakers signed up?
I have one more speaker signed up as support.
Okay, does that speaker wish to give comment at this time?
Yes, if that's okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jaime Pacheco. I am the executive director of the senior living community called Magnolia Glen. I'm also representing Kisco Senior Living. And I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak and for adding our request for a traffic impact analysis to include the single warrant study at the intersection of Sherborne Place and Creedmoor. Magnolia Glen is a 208 senior living apartment community. We have approximately 160 independent living residents who live here. In other words, these folks still drive, some are still employed. And so I wanted to emphasize that piece, that we're not just an assisted living community. And although we want to be positive partners in this project, in the greater kind of strategy of this area of Raleigh, like was already clearly stated, our primary concern is the traffic on Creedmoor Road that will result with this project and the safety impact on our residents. Currently, it's almost impossible to make a left-hand turn heading north on Creedmoor Road, and equally as challenging is making a right-hand turn headed south on Creedmoor Road. And we think although this difficulty is present during peak morning and evening traditional commute times, the challenge is really present all day. And this has been an ongoing issue and a concern that we believe this project may have the opportunity to be more of a concern. So we want to just reiterate that piece. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak and for adding that signal warrant study at the time of the site plan submittal. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. I'd now like to allow for questions and comments from the commissioners. Does anybody have any questions or comments? If so, please be recognized to speak. Commissioner Miller?
So when I first heard about this project, I had some concerns similar to Mr. Parrish's concerns about the building height and massing and density next to single family neighbors and low density residential. As I was hearing the presentation about with the conditions, and then in addition, the topography with the eastern downward slope on the site, and then the height slope increase with the single family neighbors to the east, I was encouraged and feel better about that. In particular, the condition requiring a maximum of 3 stories within 75 feet of the single family neighbors to the east. I know that Mr. Doyle said he was concerned in particular that the neighbors believed that this building might be 50 feet below the height being proposed with this building. But as I'm reading this, if the building immediately proximate to the neighbors has a maximum of 3 stories, that combined with the downward sloping topography at the proposed site I was going to see if the applicant or staff could address what that, whether more information about those concerns. Excuse me. And whether that height difference might be achieved or threatened with the neighbors.
This is Collier Marsh. I can address that. So we've done some kind of study of how layouts could be. Obviously, as we know that the plans aren't part of the rezoning, but in some instances, it looks like as much as 2 stories will actually sit below grade from those adjacent residential properties. Another thing worth noting is that the homes to the east of the site are between 100 and 150 feet from the property line as well, and wooded backyard. So in addition to the screening we're providing, and then sitting down below in the depth in the bowl there, we really think there's going to be some effective screening of buildings on our site. The risk you run if you start pushing things further to the east is you actually move upslope, and I think can have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve, which you start making things have to go upwards higher above those residential properties. So we're trying to achieve the appropriate balance by going down within the topography and providing more effective screening where possible.
Is there any additional question or comment from commissioners? Commissioner Rains?
I think it's a question for the applicant. I'm guessing they're going to have vehicular access to Sherborne Place. And I was looking at the maps on that. It looks like it has no shoulders or sidewalks or any sort of connectivity. It's a small residential access road. Has there been any discussion with neighbors or the city about improving that road if it's used for access to the site?
That's a great question. So at this time, we don't have access to Sherborne Place. We would love to have it, but haven't been able to secure an option there. So at this time, we are planning on purely access to Creedmoor Road. But that kind of emphasizes the nature of the condition we've included, which is to both do the TIA and also that signal warrant analysis, because if we do find a way to have access that's done at site plan, then that would allow us to provide a more effective solution and really consider what's actually being proposed at that stage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rains. Are there any additional questions? Commissioner O'Haver? And then Commissioner
question. I have a question for staff. The comp plan defines low density residential and moderate density residential uses in a unit per acre definition, but it does not for medium and high density. And it appears in the comp plan that the differences between those are the sort of massing and building size. Is that correct? And where does this proposal fall as it compares to low, moderate, medium, and high density residential?
So first off, those when the UDO was adopted in 2013, we only kept units per acre in the R zones. And so, and they went up to 10 units per acre. And so anything denser than that would be an RX, and RX did not have a specific density range associated with it. So we amended the land use categories to talk more about building height and massing. Your second question is where this falls in that, and the way the comp plan addresses it is in the land use element in table LU2, and table LU2 kind of sets forth what are permissible building heights or recommended building heights for these different land use categories. So the medium density residential, if you're in a sort of general area, max of 4, and if you're in an edge area, and an edge area is within 150 feet of low to moderate density use, which of course all the uses on Shelburne Place that would fall into that category. So nothing should be taller than 3 stories within that 150-foot area. Outside of that, towards Creedmoor Road, there's sort of a recommended max of 4, unless it's in one of these other designations, such as a core transit area, which this is not, because it's not a corridor on a frequent network corridor, emerging urban center or neighborhood center. I would defer to Hannah. Was there any other analysis in the staff report as to height beyond what I said?
No, that covered it.
Okay.
Commissioner McIntosh, did you have a question as well?
I have a comment. This again is a big picture comment. Again, we heard 3 rezoning cases for affordable housing at our last meeting, which were all in East Raleigh. And per comprehensive plan map H2, this site in North Raleigh is within an affordable housing opportunity area, but no subsidized housing is being offered.
Would you like the applicant to address that?
This isn't really for the applicant. I'm just making an overall note of what I see as a pattern of development in Raleigh that I personally think Raleigh would be healthier if our affordable housing was more dispersed throughout the city. And our comprehensive plan has policies that encourage this, but in the current development climate, we're not seeing the pattern recommended by the comprehensive plan. It's not about this. I'm just pointing out this individual case falls into the pattern of not meeting that goal in the comprehensive plan.
Understood. Thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you, Chair Fox. My question is sort of related to what Commissioner McIntosh just said. So I would actually like a response from the applicant if they can provide one. And it is, I actually don't have a huge problem with this rezoning. Having lived almost directly adjacent to it for about 7 years, I think this is a fairly ideal location for apartments. The proximity to the mall and the shopping centers, the fairly recent addition of sidewalks along Creedmoor in that area seem to make this a pretty good location. One of the things that I was a little sad about, although I know the applicant has nothing to do with that, it is a function of the comp plan and the zoning, is the loss of the naturally occurring affordable housing that's there now. We've seen over the years a lot of these homes disappear from Creedmoor Road, and I realize that's just a natural progression of being on the major corridor. But I would love to hear the applicant's response about rents. I know we can't add conditions or any type of requirements related to rents or affordable housing, but I'd just like to give the applicant a chance to speak about who they're envisioning living in these apartments, especially since they'll be removing some affordable housing.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. And so, although this request doesn't have a commitment to, deed restricted affordable housing or some conditions that have been proposed in projects past, the developer involved in this project is Goldberg Companies, who owns a number of properties in the area and is developing properties in Cary and Apex as well right now. And they have a program. It's essentially a friends and family program where they provide discount rates and waiver of fees for city employees, police officers, teachers, and other folks that fall within categories where they serve the community, but perhaps don't have the income necessary to otherwise meet or rent these locations. So they have a program in place at all of their communities. I'd encourage you to go to, I think it's goldbergcompanies.com or GCI, and take a look, but it essentially provides opportunities for folks that fall within those categories to get reduced rates to live in their communities.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing no other comment, I would like to entertain a motion Please remember to be recognized before you make the motion, and the motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Commissioner O'Haver?
I'd like to make a motion. Let's see here. I move to recommend approval of case Z1021. The rezoning case is consistent with the future land use map and consistent with the relevant policies in the comprehensive plan. Furthermore, approval is reasonable in the public interest because of these specific policies. LU 1.2, future land use map and zoning consistency. LU 1.3, conditional use district consistency. LU 2.2, compact development. LU 5.6, buffering requirements. And policy H 1.8, zoning for housing.
Commissioner Miller?
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner O'Haver and a second from Commissioner Miller. Is there any additional conversation or any debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapman,
Aye.
Commissioner Mann,
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
Commissioner Rains,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Winters.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.3, this is case number Z1121. This is a request to rezone approximately 36 acres of land from residential 6 to residential 10 conditional use. The property is located on Page Road, south of T.W. Alexander Road. This request has not been previously discussed. I'd like to ask for a staff presentation from John Anagnos. Before Mr. Anagnos begins, I'd like to acknowledge that there may have been a hand that I missed. Vice Chair Winters, if you wanted to make a comment on that last case, would you be able to hold it till report of commission members?
If the applicant is still available, because it was a question addressed to them.
Let's go ahead and do that now. If there's no objection.
Still here.
Okay,
Please
great.
go ahead.
Thank you. I was just curious because of the program that you said to try to address missing middle with workforce housing or employees. Where is that found on your website? I can't find it.
We can send you a link to it. And I just want to clarify to make sure I have the language correct. So it's reduced fees and deposits and best available pricing is the official provisions that are applied. And I will provide a link to the entire planning commission to that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Does that answer your question, Vice Chair Winters? Excellent, thank you. With that, let's move back to case number Z1121 with John Anagnos.
Okay, check. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yes, this site is on the northwest area of Raleigh. It's in Durham County, but has been annexed into Raleigh's corporate limits. So it has Raleigh zoning. Currently it's zoned residential 6. And for those of you who are on the commission 2 years ago, you may remember a previous case where the northwest portion of this site was initially rezoned to residential 6 as a general use request and annexed into Raleigh. And the request today is for residential 10 with conditions. Next slide, please. So there's Raleigh zoning to the east and the south of this site, mostly residential 6. And then to the north and west, that's Durham County. And those areas are mostly zoned for residential. There is a light industrial area to the northwest where there is a FedEx shipping facility. Next slide, please. Here you can see the area. So this is to the west of Briar Creek. And so the neighborhood to the south is actually part of the Briar Creek plan development. And then to the north is a townhouse development in Durham County. And this is the northernmost portion of Raleigh's annexation area in this section of that boundary between Raleigh and Durham County. And the site is mostly wooded currently. Next slide, please. Here you can see a little closer look. Next slide, please. The street view shows a similar picture. So the site largely wooded, and you can see in the photo on the bottom left is the neighborhood to the north. It was under construction when street view was done there. It's finished currently. And then on the bottom right, you can see the neighborhood to the south. Next slide, please. There are conditions offered that largely make this request similar to a residential 6 zoning district. So the overall density is limited to 6 units per acre, and then the allowed uses are basically residential uses, and no apartments would be allowed. And then there is a requirement for open area to account for 25% of the site. And so that's basically area that is not part of public streets or part of home lots. And then there are 2 buffer areas along the neighborhoods to the north and south. Next slide, please. The density doesn't change going from a residential 6 zoning to a requested residential 10 with a zoning condition capping the density at 6 units per acre. And I'll also make a note at this point that the missing middle text change that some of you will be seeing this afternoon would potentially expand the allowed density in a residential 6 district in the future if it's approved. But because that density cap is offered by zoning condition, the missing middle text change would not allow an expansion of the density on this site because it would still be controlled by that zoning condition. So the main change in terms of this table by the request is the setbacks. The side setbacks do get slightly smaller with that residential 10 district. And next slide, please. Here you can see the buffer areas that are offered by zoning condition. So basically adjacent to home sites in the neighboring neighborhoods. I will note that the width of these buffers, as shown with these yellow bars, is not the width required by the condition. It's just easier to see with them a little bit wider that way. Next slide, please. So the request is consistent with the future land use map recommendation of low density residential, although it would allow the townhouse building type, which is not recommended by that designation. It does have that cap on density at 6 units per acre, which is aligned with the future land use category. And it also has that open area requirement to mitigate that more intense building type of townhouse that would be allowed. Next slide, please. No urban form guidance applies to this site. Next slide, please. So the case is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan due to the consistency with the future land use map. And as the next slide will show, a number of policies related to encouraging a diverse and ample supply of housing while at the same time maintaining compatibility with existing residential development nearby. Next slide. There are no inconsistent policies identified. Next slide. And so you have until July 12th to make your recommendation to City Council, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. Next, I'd like to hear from Laura Good, representing the applicant. The applicant has a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
All right, thank you. Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners, my name is Laura Good. I'm with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein, 301 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, on behalf of the applicant. Our team is also on the line and available for questions, including Bob Anderson with Pulte Group, the applicant, Brian Purdy with McAdams, the site plan and engineer, as well as Travis Flewitt with Kimley Horn, the traffic engineer. Next slide, please. This is a request to rezone property along Page Road, approximately 35 acres from R6 to R10 CU. And as John noted, the site is on the east side of Page Road, and it's located between TW Alexander Drive to the north and Globe Road to the south. While a portion of the property is in Durham County, as John noted, the entirety of the site is located within the City of Raleigh's corporate limits and planning jurisdiction. Additionally, this site was originally part of a rezoning request around 2005 for originally for development with that Regency neighborhood to the south. And at that time, it was rezoned to R6. And at that time, in the R6 district, townhouses were permitted as a building type. As we know now, that is not currently the case. So this rezoning to R10CU is simply to allow for townhouses as was originally contemplated as a permitted use for the site. With this in mind, we are proposing 6 conditions. First, limiting the density to 6 units per acre, which is the same as the current zoning and the single family neighborhood to the south. Prohibiting all uses except for single unit, 2-unit, and multi-unit living. Prohibiting apartment building type. Requiring a minimum of 25% of the net site area to be open area. And then additionally, 2 conditions requiring additional buffering on portions of the northern and southern property lines based on multiple meetings with the residents located closest to the site. During this case, I will note that we had numerous meetings, both virtual and on-site, as well as correspondence with the neighbors, in addition to the 2 required neighborhood meetings in order to answer specific questions about the street connections, which we'll talk about in a moment, traffic, and to ensure adequate buffers for the nearby residences. Next slide, please. So this shows a schematic plan that illustrates the buildable area, which is shown in gray in the center of the site, the condition committing to the 25% minimum open area, which is shown in light green around the perimeter of the buildable area, as well as the proposed Page Road entrance location up at the northwest corner of the site, and then the required street stub connections with Jordanus Drive to the south and Trilogy Boulevard to the north. And transportation staff noted in the staff report that these required connections per the UDO support multiple transportation policies, will reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled, increase efficiency in providing city services, and improve the local circulation network. This also shows the location, which John had showed you previously, of the proposed buffer conditions to the extent those areas do not qualify for TCA. So on the north, there will be in that red area along the northern property line, a 10-foot landscape buffer with a 6-foot wood privacy fence, 15 evergreen plantings per 100 linear feet with a minimum 5-foot height at planting. And then on the southern boundary along the properties abutting that Jordanus Drive street connection, there will be a 20-foot landscape buffer containing 15 evergreen plantings per 100 linear feet, again with a 5-foot minimum height at planting. So these have been strategically placed and discussed with those neighbors, again, closest to the site. And note that the other property lines either have existing vegetation on those adjacent properties that will provide screening, or will abut significant open area that we've reserved as part of the zoning condition, or both. Also note that there is a stream that runs east to west on the southeastern portion of the property that will have the required 50-foot stream buffer on either side, and that there will be no development south of that stream buffer, as noted on the schematic plan. Also note that the majority of the neighborhood, the single family neighborhood to the south, that the majority of the shared southern property line is with HOA owned property that has vegetation that will provide additional setback and buffering for those properties to the south. Next slide, please. So this slide shows how this request is compatible with the zoning in the area and the surrounding residential uses. As John noted, most of the surrounding area in the Raleigh limits is zoned R6, including the Regency development directly to the south. Durham zoning is not shown in this image, but is mostly zoned PDR with densities around 6 units per acre. So directly to the north is the Trivium Townhouse development zoned at 6.6 units per acre. And to the west, across Page Road, is the Page Square development zoned for 6.5 units per acre. Next slide, please. And this slide shows the future land use map designation for the subject and surrounding properties, which is low density residential. And this designation recommends a density of 1 to 6 units per acre, with townhomes being appropriate with significant open space set aside. And as John noted in the staff report notes, this request is consistent with the FLUME with the conditions limiting density to 6 units per acre and the preservation of a minimum of 25% open area. Next slide, please. So finally, as staff notes, this request is overall consistent with the comp plan and consistent with numerous comprehensive plan policies, including the flume designation, conditional use district consistency, housing variety, infill development, and zoning for housing. This rezoning will allow for the additional townhouse building type to add housing variety, keep the market supplied with housing, and assist missing middle intent of the upcoming text change with conditions to preserve open area and maintain consistency with the adjacent neighborhoods. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I'd like to reserve any remaining time for response to any public comment, and we respectfully request that you recommend approval of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Good. I do not believe we have any members of the public signed up to speak on this request. Ray, can you correct me if that is incorrect?
I do have one person potentially signed up to speak, another just here to watch.
Okay, let's allow 10 minutes for members of the public to be able to speak in opposition to the case.
Christine Wilson, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Thank you for allowing me to speak here. I don't want to cause a lot of waves, and I know that whatever I have to say is probably not going to make a difference, as I've seen in these meetings. But I did want to point out that more than 400 supporters have signed an online petition to oppose this case. I have sent a link to the Raleigh Planning Commission. You can see all the comments there if you're interested. The 2030 Comprehensive Plan has designated this site as low density, and that comprehensive plan and future land use also defines low density as R6 and below. So I'm not sure that I agree that this is consistent with those plans. On top of that, there is a meeting today, TC 520, to discuss changing and permitting townhomes on R6 zone property. So in that case, we wouldn't need to change it. I just feel like R10 is a slippery slope. We've got another section in this community that's been changed to R10, and they are building 114 bedrooms on 6.5 acres. And the road that leads to that is a third of the required width, and it was approved. So I'm sure this is going to get approved too. But our main concern really in Regency is extending our stub road. This is Briar Creek Country Club, and it was sold as an active living community where we walk our dogs, we ride our bikes. There have been people who try to cut through our neighborhood to get from Page to Globe. Ultimately, they get turned around and ask how to get out of here. So that once if that's opened, we're going to have a lot more traffic through our community. And that's my main concern. I feel like our property values are going to decrease. We're not going to have the same lifestyle that we have now, especially with airport or aviation being extended and that new property that Toll is building. I just feel like if this is approved, we really need to probably sell our house before building starts. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Wilson. Are there any other members of the public signed up to speak?
That's all I had that had asked to speak.
Excellent. I'd now like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. I will start off just with the clarification. If I'm reading the application and the conditions correctly, there is a cap put essentially at R6. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, that's correct. So regardless of future text changes that modify the residential 10 zoning district, the overall density for this site under this zoning would be capped at 6 units per acre.
And also, John, while I have you on the line, if in this particular case, if this applicant waited and there was a successful text change that allowed townhouses in the R6 district, they would be allowed that by right and would not be required additional buffering that's been shown for this particular plan. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I've gotten a note that the applicant may want to respond as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Fox. Just quickly, in response to a couple of the comments from Ms. Wilson, in terms of the change.org petition, my understanding is that that was created very early on in the case after the first neighborhood meeting. Since then, we have engaged with the neighbors extensively, including the HOA board from the Regency neighborhood that Ms. Wilson lives in. As recently as yesterday, I had contact with the board members for that HOA, and they indicated that the Regency board is not opposed to this application. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner McIntosh?
Thank you, Chair Fox. I was just going to make same comment on this case as I have on the previous two. That this is also a site Northwest Raleigh that per comprehensive plan map H2 is within an affordable housing opportunity area, but no subsidized housing is being offered. And this is in contrast to 3 cases we heard at our last meeting where affordable housing was offered in East Raleigh. Just pointing out the geographic differences.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing Commissioner Winters or Vice Chair Winters?
Thank you. I just want to be clear on the comments that I heard in terms of the petition, which I did pull up, and thank you so much, Ms. Wilson, for sending that to us. And the comment was that this was at the early part of the rezoning process, and there has not been any other updates because of your conversations with HOA as recent as yesterday. Making sure that I'm clear on the most recent interactions.
Sure. Thank you, Vice Chair Winters. I guess just to clarify, I was aware of that change.org petition. My understanding was that that was created right after our first neighborhood meeting. After the first neighborhood meeting, we had a virtual meeting with the HOA board of the Regency neighborhood to the south. Additionally, we had on-site meetings with neighbors to the south at that Jordanus Drive stub connection, as well as on-site meetings with Trilogy neighborhood residents to the north. And so I was just clarifying that in terms of those neighbors that we've had contact with, my understanding is that the conditions that we've offered have satisfied their concerns, and that the Regency HOA board is not in opposition to this application.
Do you have any follow-up, Vice Chair Winters?
If forgive me, Ms. Wilson would like to respond, if there are any comments that she has about it, I'd like to hear that as well. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? I'm seeing.
I'm sorry, that question was directed to Christine, the speaker before.
Yes.
Sorry,
Is she available?
she wasn't unmuted. We'll
Okay.
let her.
Okay, please.
Awesome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
thank you.
Yes, thank you. You know, the change.org petition is from individual residents. The board and the residents don't necessarily agree. So even though the board approves it, the residents themselves oppose it. for the most part. And the comments that are there are still how people feel. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Is there any additional follow-up questions or conversation from commissioners? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. The motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Commissioner Miller?
I'll make a motion to approve case Z1121 on Page Road. This case is overall consistent with the comprehensive plan, in particular policy LU 1.2 with future land use map and zoning consistency. Policy LU 1.3 conditional use district consistency. Policy LU 8.1 housing variety. And policy H 1.8 zoning for housing. This case is also reasonable and in the public interest, namely because this was based on the conditions included in this case and the forthcoming text change related to missing middle housing. This will actually provide additional buffering than would have been allowed by right without this zoning case with the new missing middle housing text change.
Thank you. We have a motion and Commissioner Rains.
Second.
We have a motion on the table from Commissioner Miller and a second by Commissioner Rains. Is there any additional conversation or debate on the merits of the motion? Okay, seeing none, I would ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Rains?
Aye.
Vice Chair Winters?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Okay, believe it or not, that concludes all of the discussion items on our agenda today. We still have approval of the minutes. That was on the board docs and you have backup material. Are there any corrections or conversation required on the minutes today? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. Just one small thing. On page 1, I think it was agenda item C, Z6720 should be Blue Ridge Road and not Creedmoor Road. That was the only thing I had.
Okay. Any additional comments or edits on the minutes that have been presented? Okay, with that, I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes. Commissioner Bennett?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. And do I have a second? Commissioner McIntosh?
Second.
And I believe we can do show of hands, Mr. York. Is that correct? Okay, by show of hands, all those in support of approving the minutes. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Okay, next on to report of the chairperson. And thank you all for attending the retreat last week. I thought that was really useful and really helpful. it's given me a lot of things to think about, and one of which actually Commissioner McIntosh reminded me of today, so thank you again for that. I'm wondering, Mr. Bowers, if we could get some information about since the time at which conditional uses allowing affordable housing were added into our toolbox during the rezoning process, if you could report out how many cases have utilized that and how many units have actually been developed based on those conditions.
Off the top of my head, I can think of two cases. One is the rezoning there on West Martin and West Street, known as Rust Bus, the Go Triangle owned property that's to be a mixed-use development with a bus terminal in the base. Of course, that was a case of publicly owned land. In terms of private ownership of land, there was a condition negotiated for the 40-story rezoning with Kane Realty at the corner of Capitol Boulevard, P Street, and Harrington Street. And none of those projects have broken ground. So to date, no units have been made. I would, if affordable housing and the sort of mechanics and economics of affordable housing development are a topic that the commission would like to take on, as you recently took on the topic of how market rate construction impacts nearby property values, and strategic planning committee, given some lead time, staff could put some information together on that. There was references to some recent approvals for affordable housing. Those were affordable housing developments that were intended to be financed through the low income housing tax credit program, which is, and then of course the rezonings you consider today were being brought by developers proposing a conventionally financed market rate development. And I know there's increasing interest as to whether those two things can be combined. And I think we could provide some information about that, as well as the legal framework for talking about it. If the Planning Commission has an interest in the topic.
I'm going to put Vice Chair Winters on the spot. Might that be something we could discuss at strategic planning?
Yes.
Okay. If there's interest in that, I see head nods. Ken, thank you for that offer. We will take you up on that. Next, I'll go to report of members. Does anybody have have a report? Okay, seeing none. Ken, you're back on the spot. For report of the Deputy Planning Director.
Sure. So I'll give you some updates from the City Council. One thing to note is there's been a really high volume of cases, as I think the Planning Commission is well aware, and you guys have done an incredible job of deliberating on those cases and reporting them out. And as a result, in order to try to spread the load and avoid extremely late evening public hearings, more cases are starting to be scheduled for the mid-month hearings, and this is a trend that could continue unless case volume subsides significantly. So 4 items were put on the daytime public hearing for May 18th. These were all items with little to no public opposition and unanimous votes of the Planning Commission to approve, and they were Z421 at Rock Quarry Road, Z521 on Pearl Road, Z621 also on Rock Quarry Road, that was the city initiated rezoning for the fire station, and Z721 for Gresham Lake Road. 4 other items that you reported out were scheduled for the evening public hearing on June 1st, and they included TC 1920 for the rezoning process, Z2220 Easton Market Plan Development. You may recall that you had recommended denial on that case. Z5420 Hargett and Harrington, and Z1821 Michael J. Smith Lane and Allen Grove Court. The scheduling of one item was deferred till May 18th to allow the applicant to submit some revised conditions. That was Z4420/TCZ 320 on Garner Road. You may recall the applicant did not come forth with any enhanced buffering requirements. they may be considering doing so now, but that is going to be back on the council agenda for scheduling the public hearing on May 18th. One item was denied. That was the 4320 Trailwood Drive. Planning Commission recommended approval on a split vote. Two items were deferred. They included Z5320 on Lead Mine and Z2620 on Avon Ferry Road. Of the things that were approved, there were 4 zoning cases: Z1817 Cashland Drive, Z4720 Leesville Road, Z2720 Industrial Drive, and Z6420 on West Johnson Street, as well as CP520, the Omnibus Comprehensive Plan amendments. Although an amendment to policy HP 1.2 was excluded because council asked for some more information on that item. Those items had all received unanimous Planning Commission votes. The last thing to report is that we've started incorporating the new section on the case analysis that evaluates equity aspects of rezoning requests. And of course, this is a topic that the Planning Commission has done work on, and you deliberated on it at your February 25th Committee of the Whole meeting. And this is consistent with your suggestion to incorporate some demographic indicators that's now reflected in this in the way that we're doing the case review. So we hope that this enhanced information, the staff reports, is helpful to you going forward. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Bowers. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Bowers or any other comments for the good of the order? Commissioner Lampman?
Can you just repeat which one was denied? Excuse me, sorry.
Sure, that was Z4320 on Trailwood Drive.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, this concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you everyone for attending this morning.